We have a new guest in the studio. He's from the KEMRI Welcome Trust, who's friends of ours who we visited in Kilifi last year. We will be talking about research and governance in Africa, developing research leaders across the continent. Before we welcome Professor Sam KINYANJUI, we want him to hear the day's proverb. City.
Yes, from the country of Mozambique. Mm-hmm. Do not try to fight a lion if you are not one yourself.
Do not try to fight a lion if you're not one yourself.
Choose your battles carefully.
Carefully.
And if I may opine, choose the ones you know you can win.
Carefully as well. There's some rebel group that's been bringing issues to the people of Mozambique for a while. There's a lion called Paul Kagame. He sent his lions there to deal with those ones. Found, kumbe ni paka.
It's in the region of Capo Delgado.
Yes.
And you know, when we're talking about natural resources, the resource I mentioned, the natural gas,
yes,
it's found in plenty.
In Capo Delgado.
In that particular part. And the capacity they have, just wait for it. Until the capacity, you'll be shocked. 4,200 billion cubic meters of natural gas. That is a lot of natural gas. A lot. So,
countries rich.
Well, I'm told that exportation to Europe has actually begun.
They have started, huh?
Yes, they have. So, when you see this sudden surge of interest that the Europeans, the Western world have on this continent, it is not all the kindness of their heart. No. It's the abundance of our resources.
This is it.
Yes.
So those al-kebabs who are trying to harass them there.
Not al-kebab.
You said al-kebab.
Yeah,
you meant that.
They're al-kebabs.
Yeah.
Trying to harass them there, they'll go nowhere.
No, they will not.
Okay.
Yes.
Professor Sam KINYANJUI. He is the head of training and capacity building at KEMRI Welcome Trust Program and also director of IDEAL. I hope I pronounced that right.
Yeah.
It's IDEAL, right?
Yeah, IDEAL. Yes.
Okay, so let's start from there. Good morning.
Morning.
Welcome to Kenya's biggest conversation.
Thank you very much.
Good to have you here.
It's a
That
pleasure.
proverb, do you relate?
Yes, to an extent. But also for us as researchers, our job is actually, to take on tough things, tough battles that have not been fought before. And there are many researchers who spend all their life trying to take on, although the lions we fight often look really tiny, in fact so tiny that we often can't even see them with our eyes, they often turn out to be really big lions. But that is our job, to spend our life fighting them, finding solutions to those. So I was about to add, don't enter into a fight that you can't unless you've been listening to motivational speakers. And if there are people who need motivational speakers occasionally,
motivational speakers.
He's scientist.
Okay.
Yeah.
But also, you see, you spend a lot of time upgrading yourself to be a lion, to be able to deal with those lions that you're dealing with, right?
Yeah. Yes.
And that's what you do as the head of capacity building at KEMRI Welcome Trust. So tell us about that. What exactly is your day job?
So maybe just to put it in context, the biggest challenge we have in Africa is our research capacity is still very low. And you can measure capacity in many different ways. Some of the ways are the more formal ones, where we look at how many publications, scientific publications coming out, how many patents are coming out, how many products are being developed. And by whichever measure you take, you will find that Africa, and Kenya included, lags behind considerably compared to other countries. Of course, we do have our day-to-day innovations, and I'm not saying that Africans are not making products, but you're talking of products that makes us economically competitive, products that you can apply across a wide range of populations, for example, public health interventions. And in those areas, we tend to lag behind. And part of the reason is not because we are not intellectually capable. We have extremely sharp people. We have seen the innovations that come out of Kenya, for example, M-Pesa and others, and out of Africa. The challenge is that we do not have structures and systems for training. Yes, we do have universities, but in many cases, they are not really meeting their mandate that part of their mandate is research, and they are not meeting it well. So what we do at the KEMRI Welcome to Research program, and that is the department that I head, we have created a framework which we call the Attract, Train, Retain, and Transform framework. Mm-hmm. The framework, we have schemes for attracting young Kenyans to research. A lot of young Kenyans don't even consider research as part of their career when they're thinking of their career options. And especially given what we tend to see, we see money, we see entrepreneurs and all those sort of people. What are our role models? Mm. Often they don't get to see researchers. And if in the universities they also don't have a very vibrant research going on, that is never in their menu of options for careers.
It's never in their line of sight. You don't see researchers.
So at that Attract level, we have schemes. We start with school graduates and secondary school graduates, the top graduates in Kilifi County. We are focusing on Kilifi County in part because just of our capacity, and that is also where our largest campus is. But our hope is that we can expand, and we bring the top 10 students. They spend time with us 2 months. They just get exposure to the professional environment, but also get to hear about research. Not all of them go on to become researchers, but a number of them do change their university options and now opt for, career subjects that are more research oriented. Right. We also have undergraduate attachments who again come and spend 2 months. They again get exposure to research. At the top of that, we have what used to be an internship program. It's now been converted to a postgraduate diploma in health research methods in conjunction with Pony University. Mm-hmm. And there what we focus on is that they come in, they have about 4 taught courses, but most of the work is getting experience and getting exposure to research. And one of the things that really changes in them, it's not so much the source of book knowledge, because they'll have had that at undergraduate. It's just becoming confident in understanding how research works. And for example, they'll sit in scientific meetings, and in our setup, they'll see a student asking a professor a question. And they start understanding that science is about asking questions. It's being confident to challenge what is known. So that is at the attracting level. And with that, we have been able to, and we normally have about 20 to 25 interns every year. Mm-hmm. And most of them, out of about nearly 300 now, over 250 have ended up going on to do masters and PhD because they now get attracted into the research career. Mm. At the training level, we have masters and PhD training. Now, we are not ourselves an accredited university, but we have the setup where people can do really high-quality health research training. So we have people doing their masters, we have PhDs also doing their projects with us. At any one time, we have about 50 to 60 PhD students, about 30 to 40 master students embedded directly within our program, and on a day-to-day basis they come to our program, or they are maybe away working together with our collaborators. And the key thing there we focus on are 3 areas. We focus on the quality of training, supervision and mentorship, and exposure and giving also generic training such as leadership. We also focus on the training environment itself. So exposure to really high quality research infrastructure, exposure to a very multidisciplinary environment where they are not only learning their own things, but they get a very wide view. And an example is you have had some of them come here to talk about, or in other radio stations, talk about their research. Yep. They get training about community and public engagement. Mm-hmm. The third area we focus on is support, living support, operational support. So all our students, including the ones who come at the secondary level, we try and give them a stipend. we will go out and source for funding so that we are able to include students from all parts of the country. We don't want a situation where only students from, say, Nairobi, Kilifi, or wherever, or higher socioeconomic status are the ones that we are training. We have people coming, students from Turkana all the way to Kwale and all the way to Isebania and Wajir. So we are very strong on inclusivity in terms of socioeconomic ability, but also in terms of gender. People often shocked when they see the number of young, very eloquent, very good female scientists that we have. When we go, for example, to visit schools, the female students are surprised when they see, the people who are out there. And the other thing that we focus on is catching people young. The average age of our PhD students by graduation is about 30 years. In Kenya, generally people in their 40s. Yeah. But that is when you're sharpest. Me, I'm past my sort of sharpness peak. These are the guys who are really producing. So that's that level. Then the next level, so I talked of attract, train, retain.
Retain now.
We want to retain those people we've trained. Some of them we retain in our program, but we don't have space to take up everybody. So we want to retain them in Kenya. We have schemes where we have a bit of funding to enable them go off into local universities. So if they go to the university or to another research center in Kenya and say, I need employment, they say, we don't have funding. They say, what about if I come with a year salary?
Right.
So then they are ready to take you in. So we are.
So the salary is being paid by the program.
By the program,
KEMRI
yes.
Welcome Trust
Yes,
program.
Yes.
But the person is basically embedded in a different institution.
In a different institution.
Right.
And then also what you seek is matching funding. So if you say, we're going to give a year, are you going to give a year? And often people say, yeah, I'm happy to give a year. And that has allowed our PhD students and graduates to then transition very successfully to different research centers, both locally and internationally. So we are retaining them both locally, but there are those who will go international. We still have an angle of retention where they are doing research that is relevant to Africa. Okay. So we have retained them for Africa, even if physically they're not. For example, we have graduates who will go and do malaria research in Oxford. Many of you are familiar now with the Chaddock's vaccine. We have a number of people who have worked in the Jenner Institute. If they're working on issues or health challenges that are relevant to Africa, then we still consider them as retained. Because, to be honest, you can't retain every person. But we want to take advantage.
You have 50 to 60 masters and PhD students
at
any given time.
At any given time, we have 50 to 60 PhD students, another 40 master students, about 25 PhD students, and we'll have 10 also undergraduate attachments and 10 school leavers attachment scheme, the graduates, the O-level students.
That's quite a number. Yeah. That's quite a number.
Remember when we went to Kilifi, we met a doctor who went through this scheme of yours right from school, Dr. Sophie Uyoga.
Yeah.
So the testimony, or should we say the live testimony of how it is this program works is out there in the open for anyone who cares to see. But I wanted to ask this question. Yes, you're not an accredited university, but which universities do you collaborate with?
Yeah. So we collaborate with a wide range of universities. We have collaborations with local universities. A good example is the PGD program. We collaborate very closely with Pwani University. They provide the accreditation, the quality control, the examination, the registration, and they have been extremely helpful in ensuring that all the bureaucratic aspects are all really well handled. And so our PhD students are probably one of the few PhD student schemes where people come in, do everything, and graduate within the year. And on the graduation day, they get their certificate. They actually go home with their certificate. Not many universities are able to do that. We also run 2 master's programs together with Pwani University. And again, among the few master's programs that people come and spend exactly 2 years and graduate and walk away with their master's certificates. We also collaborate with Nairobi University, especially in the area of pediatric diseases and clinical research. Again, we collaborate with Strathmore. We are running now a PhD program in healthcare management. As you know, a lot of in our profession, we tend to be promoted by our academic qualification rather than our managerial or leadership skills. And so one of the areas we are focusing on is mid-level health managers, and we are working together at Strathmore University on a PhD in healthcare management programs. So those are some of our local ones. Now, internationally, we collaborate very closely, obviously, with Oxford University, which is one of the partners of the KEMRI Welcome Research Program. We also collaborate with the Open University of the UK. And let me just clarify, because some people don't know about the Open University. This is not a virtual university. It's a university with a campus at Milton Keynes. It's a relatively highly ranked university in the UK. But what they have is a system where if you have all the capacity to train for PhD, but you don't have an accreditation, they can accredit you as though you are not, well, not accredit, because that's a bit more technical, but they can give you a status, what you call an affiliated research center. And once you are an ARC of the OU, you can train as though you are a campus of the OU, but they are very stringent. You have to give 6 monthly reports. They physically come and inspect all our books and everything, and all our systems. And many of our students are registered there. But we also have students registered in University of Cape Town, Wits. We have students registered in Amsterdam, Stockholm. We have strong collaborations with Warwick University and other many universities. So we do have a wide range. What is common is that because they are now familiar with our structures and systems for managing students, they have pretty much allowed us to do most of the things. Okay. So we recruit the students, we do the pre-registration assessments ourselves, we do the monitoring, the 6 monthly reports, at the end of the first year, all our students have to do a mini viva for them to continue. And we also organize for the thesis, and many of the defenses are actually done physically at the KEMRI Welcome. But this is because we've been allowed by all these universities, including London School of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene and Oxford and others, because of the quality of the student management systems that we have put in place.
Do you have collaborations within the continent?
Yes, we do. We collaborate with the University of Ghana. We collaborate with Wits, with Cape Town. We collaborate with Makerere, and also at Mbale. What is the university called in Mbale? The name jumps me. But yeah, so we do have a lot of collaboration. And those are the universities. But in terms of individual, all our students, especially from PhD level, have at least 2 to 3 supervisors. And mostly, you'll have one supervisor from the program, and you'll have a collaborating supervisor from across the continent, from across the world. The last I checked, we had over 150 individual collaborators who are core supervisors and core trainers and core mentors for our students.
There's a fourth aspect of the ATRR, which was after retain is reform, is it?
Transform.
It's transform.
Yeah, and this is focusing more and more on having transformative leadership in research. And so we want to move from simply looking at training as imparting technical knowledge to imparting leadership capacities. And when you talk about research leaders, we are not just talking of people who are able to do a technical thing very well. We want to talk about people who can dictate the research agenda for Africa. You remember we've begun this session, you talking about why do we have the West, why do we have the South, do we have everybody else being interested in Africa. And it is the case that because a lot of the funding coming to Africa for research actually comes from outside, there's always a risk, and it has happened, so I won't pretend, not necessarily with our program because we have developed very strong local direction, but you find that the research agenda is being dictated from elsewhere. So when you talk about developing research leaders, we want people who can dictate the research agenda for Africa, in Africa. And so what we talk about call shifting the center of gravity for research for Africa to Africa. So it's not someone else doing our research. It's also about creating or generating graduates who have the status or the clout to negotiate with the funders, to negotiate with our local governments, to push for mainstreaming of research. So we want to transform the research space, if you like, by creating people with strong leadership capacities.
One of the things that you talked about before was that the challenge of not recognizing the importance of the role that research plays in countries. Beyond the university where the learning happens, beyond the training center, beyond KEMRI. But looking at all the training that is taking place, looking at people then who are armed with a PhD by the time they're 35 and things like this, what do you think it would have in terms of impact on a country to have all of these individuals trained at this level? Yesterday, I think we saw another graduate from KEMRI who's just attained her PhD. Just things that we see like this. What impact would it have? Because unfortunately, I mean, as terrible as it sounds, somebody may say, well, okay, so really, what does research really do for us? Can we focus on other things? So can you shed some light on the importance of having this research in country and what it does?
So first, maybe I'll come from a slightly different angle and demystify research. Because often the reason people ask, what does research do for us? Is, and I often get asked, where you've been in research all those years, Prof. Na hujatengeneza dawa, because for them, research is a product.
And something tangible.
And yes, of course, part of research is that we are trying to develop interventions, except that interventions are not only let me call them biologicals. They are not only the things we take or the things that are injected. And so when we talk about health research, for example, people tend to think about clinical research or biomedical research. So maybe allow me a minute or two to really expand the meaning of health research, because once I do that, people can start seeing all the other areas where we are having impact, although it is not evident. It's not packed in a small container where you'll open. So if you think about the reason a child dies in hospital or outside, there's a whole range of reasons why that happens. They may have gotten to the hospital, but they got to the hospital and there were no drugs. And the reason there were no drugs, either it's because the supply chain is broken. We have people who are studying what is the most efficient way of taking drugs to our facilities. And it may look obvious. It may look like just put them in a pickup but remember, there is a cost to it, there are logistics and all that. So we have people who are looking at how you supply. That is still health research. That child may have died because the drugs were there, but the doctor wasn't available. And before we shout and say, those doctors are that way, you have to also appreciate he may be the only doctor. He's been working or she may be the only doctor. She's been working 24 hours. They need to take a break.
They may be in theater.
That is an aspect of human resource for health workers. Again, there's a whole area of research there. How do we develop our human resource for health? You come back to the fact that this child may have arrived late. Why did they get there late? Because the roads are bad and they couldn't be brought to the hospital. Again, is the hospital placement in a place where it is easy. So we have people, again, who are looking at that whole area of how do you prioritize where access to care, where is care. For example, we have had a PhD student who has done one of the most high-resolution maps of all the health centers in Africa, and then using Google Maps showed where the roads are and all that. It was surprising. Many African governments didn't know where their own facilities are because the facilities are put there often for political reasons, for social reasons, without making consideration. So we have people who are doing all those sort of mapping of access. Again, and these are not people who came from biomedical. These are people who come from geography or engineering. We come back to the child. They came late because the mother delayed. Why did the mother delay? It could have been because of their level of education they didn't recognize. That education and health is a whole area. or they recognize, but they simply couldn't afford to go to hospital at that point, so they waited to see whether the child will be well. You see, that's an economic issue.
Wow.
All they understood, they had the capacity, but they were not empowered. They had to wait for the husband to come and say, unaweza kupeleka mtoto hospitali. That is a gender and a social issue. Again, we have people who are studying gender and social. So the reason I've taken time to expound on all this, and finally, of course, they may have died because of the malaria itself, and it's because we don't have the medicine. We don't understand. There's a part of the biology we are still struggling. That is the biomedical scientist's work. So you can see that there's a whole range of people. The reason I explain that is that we are doing a lot of work in all those areas, and we are generating data and information that has been used to change policy, to inform prioritization on care. We have people who are working directly embedded within Ministry of Health, working on universal health coverage, working on informing, for example, funding and financing of health. And so we have had a lot of impact. But to give a simple practical example, when COVID happened, because of both the investment in human resource and training that we had, and also the cutting edge, biomedical infrastructure we had, we were pretty much the first institution to start doing testing. That's why you notice Kilifi seemed to have had a big spike of COVID. It sounded like everything is happening in Kilifi, but that's because we were the people who had the first capacity. Not only that, we even changed the protocols for testing COVID so that we're able to use much less reagent. Because remember that time there was a big challenge with reagents. We have also were the first really to start sequencing, looking at the variants, tearing down the virus so that we can see what variants are there. And we generally have been the leading institution on informing that progression. So, as I said, but also we are practically have been again involved in examples in malaria interventions. We have been we generated the seminal work that actually showed bed nets can prevent death, especially for children from malaria. And it is that work that led to policies that have been adopted by WHO. And we have a lot of examples where we've had impact. And unfortunately, I think sometimes we are not as but that's the nature of science. You don't go around beating.
You don't tell us what you do. So we're waiting for medicine.
Yeah.
We're waiting for you to tell us what medicine you've actually come up with. But Doc, let's take a break.
Yes.
At 25 minutes to 9.
Yeah.
Professor Sam KINYANJUI is the head of training and capacity building at the KEMRI Welcome Trust program and also director of IDEAL. You'll tell us what IDEAL then is after we take a break. We're talking about research and governance in Africa, insights from the initiative to develop research leaders for the continent.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
Continues with Professor Sam KINYANJUI from KEMRI Welcome Trust program and director of IDEAL. What's IDEAL?
Well, IDEAL is the initiative to develop African research leaders. And really what it is, when we started the program back in 1989, one of the things that we set out to do was to build local research capacity. As I said, the program is a partnership between KEMRI, which is the Kenya Medical Research Institute, Oxford University, and the Welcome Trust. The Welcome Trust is a funding entity that funds research, animal and human health research across the world. But when we started, we didn't have dedicated funding or even a kind of dedicated platform. And a lot of the training then was if someone has a bit of money in their grant, they might train a master student. If they have a bit more money, they might sponsor a PhD student. But we realize that you cannot really systematically build capacity if you're depending on this sort of ad hoc funding and without really systematic aim. And so we sat together, the then director, and tried to define or design a framework for systematic training, but one that will also enhance our capacity to train. And so we then got, we applied to the Welcome Trust, and they gave us money specifically for capacity building. And this was then 8 million pounds, which was then added up to that to 12 million pounds. So about 1.5 billion shillings. And that framework that enables us now to have a systematic approach to building capacity is what we call IDEAL, the Initiative to Develop African Research Leaders. We subsequently got another £8 million. So to date, having trained over almost 1,000 people, including about 120 PhD students, graduates, we have invested about 3 billion Kenya shillings. And the reason I'm talking about the money is to emphasize the amount of investment the country needs to put in.
That's 3 B is not small change.
It's not small change, but on the other hand, if I look at a bit controversial, if you look at
of 3 trillion,
some of the scandals that come out, that is a change for some of those.
It's 2 billion a day.
Yeah, you didn't just say that.
So, and this is the thing. I mean, even as we say that it might sound humorous, but everybody's looking for a result.
Yeah.
And sometimes it is a result then that guarantees that somebody will see the importance in something.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. If you have been in the world, you already know why research is important. But for somebody who is crunching the numbers, for somebody who's talking about policy from a government level, they want to see the results. So what are some of the things that we have seen as a result of what has already been happening with this funding that has come externally? That somebody can then say, hold on a minute, perhaps we need to be a tad more serious about this thing. We've talked about Abuja declarations until we're blue in the face, and in terms of what the recommendation is. What can we say that as a result of, I mean, in the 26 years that you have been in Kilifi, doing what you've done, what are some of the things that we have seen? Okay, this done, that can show and say, look, guys, it is clear that we need to put a little bit more focus to this.
So let me first say, if the last 2 years did not teach us anything about why countries need to invest in research, I don't know what will. Because as you notice very quickly, we were struggling for even the most basic things. We were struggling for medicines, we were struggling for PPEs, oxygen. We were struggling for oxygen, and we are waiting for other people. And yes, we can complain, and rightly so, about the iniquity of vaccine coverage or global distribution of vaccines and all that. But part of that just reviewed our vulnerability to the vagaries of the medical interventions distribution system in the world. And as long as we remain in a situation where we are waiting on other people to do the basic research that generates, remember, even the Panadol you take is a product of research. Sometimes we fail to understand. Today, if you went to any pharmacy, there'll be maybe 1,000 different medical products, and each of those products you're seeing there has had to go through research, and that has been a product of long-term investment. So, if we are willing to remain subservient to everybody else with regards to health interventions, then that's fine. We need not, invest. But if we want to become secure in terms of health, then we also have to invest in research. But to give you practical examples, and at the risk of repeating myself, I give you the example of bed nets. In the West, they don't have malaria, they don't have mosquitoes. There was no impetus to do research on a bed net. That is research that had to be done here. And Kilifi produced some of the seminal evidence that then pushed bednet adoption as one of the key malaria control tools. And even more importantly, not only did we provide evidence that they work, initially they were being given at a cost. And the argument was that if you do not sell, or if there's no cost, people will not value them. But then we showed that the problem with that, it creates a lot of inequity. And in fact, the poorest strata of the society, who needed the beds most, would remain exposed. And again, it's work done in Kilifi that really pushed for the free distribution of bed nets alongside with other maternal and child health services. And so that's an example where you're seeing a product. But as I explained, a lot of the output in research is often in terms of data that informs policy. And for example, when you look at prioritization, you look at UHC, you look at all these areas, we have had extremely strong input in these areas. If you take the malaria treatment guidelines, the booklet that a doctor would be carrying in Kenya and in many parts of Africa, KEMRI as a whole and KEMRI Wellcome Trust have been major contributors. Probably about 30 to 40% of what is in there, those guidelines, have been a product of work and research done within KEMRI and KEMRI Wellcome Trust. So, and I'm using malaria as an example, but we diversify. We are looking at bacterial infections, pneumonia. We're informing the rollout of vaccines against pneumonia. We are currently looking at COVID vaccines that have been developed elsewhere, but that still need to be tested for the Kenyan population. So there's a lot that is happening. There's a lot of output. We work very directly and in many cases embedded within the Ministry of Health, and there's that appreciation of the work and the output that is coming from our programs.
Prof, do you get sometimes maybe frustrated the gap between research plus the government program implementers, and these are the same people who are like you, they have gone through the research, they've gone through, they understand this, and then the decision makers, who are the policy makers, who are the politicians, who are driven by something completely different. So you've come up with all these interventions. You agree with your counterparts at the ministries of health and the departments of health, but then the final decision is being made by somebody who is looking for what Ndu is asking for, something tangible, something that they'll go to the people and say, you see, I'm the one who brought this kind of program. But do you get that frustration in terms of all the work that you put in and it not being taken up?
Yes, it is, and it can be frustrating because you have to appreciate that a politician, as you say, has different interests. And one of their biggest interests is pleasing their voters so that they are voted the next round. So it can be frustrating. There are also other interests. There'll be social interests. There'll be, and so one has to be aware that the path from, and this is something that many times even our funders do not necessarily appreciate, the path from producing a result or even showing that the potential of a product to it being adopted for public health is very complex. And one has to be aware. It's not a simple line. It's not like in the morning I wake up, I have this good intervention, knock at the minister's office door, and they say, this is great. There'll be a lot of other interests. There'll be commercial interest. There'll be, as we said, political interest, and they can be frustrating. And I want to give a simple example. We've known for now almost 100 years, clean water is a simple solution for diarrhea.
Yeah.
One of the biggest cause of death in young children is diarrhea. Why? Because they are not getting clean water. You don't need new research. And yet, to date, despite, I remember when I was young, we used to be told water for everybody by the year 2000 was magical. Well, we still don't have water and clean water for everybody. So it is frustrating. We're doing our part, and I'm not saying that everybody in the ministry or the ministry is non-responsive, but yes, there are many interests that compete with our ability to implement.
Prof, let me ask this question, if I may.
Yeah.
Do you think that those involved in the research world, its complexities and all the wonderful things that the research world does, make in equal the same effort they apply in conducting research in getting people to understand what it is that they do?
Yeah, I would say it's like in any profession, there's a spectrum of people. There are people who primarily want to focus on doing their good science. And by their nature, part of the reason they are really good scientists is they have certain attributes that make them really good in that area, but not necessarily very good in another area. And then we have people who, on the other side, are a bit more on the next sort of if you like, part of the spectrum, who are able to traverse between the complex science and the sort of ordinary, the public space. And part of what we have been doing a lot is trying to train all our scientists. And not all of them will become eloquent sort of speakers in general, but we try to train our scientists to become better at public and community engagement. I don't think that it's necessarily fair to demand that every single scientist has also to be the one to go and, and broadcast what they are doing. But we try as much as possible, even those who are on that end of the spectrum where they are really just focusing on their science, to at least have certain level of capacity to communicate. But as I said, it's like in every profession. There are bankers who can barely tell you what they do. All they know is that they enter that bank and they do their thing. And if they were to try to explain to you, you would barely understand. And then there are people who are able to really explain, the knowledge brokers. So it's a spectrum.
You see why I mention it?
Yeah.
Our conversation in this country is often dominated by our politics. And part of the reason is because politicians are in our face daily.
Yes.
Either telling us things that can't work, trying to grow onions on the moon, or things like that. The things that we know probably wouldn't work. Now, I look at the emphasis that we have or we put in just the very concept of research in our institutions.
Yes.
And it doesn't take a first tier or even second tier position. It's one of those things you do to pass an exam and then you forget about it.
Yeah.
So the very concept and its importance is lost at a stage where if it was inculcated, what we're discussing now would be a lot easier. Because a lot more people, just by virtue of going through an education system, will have appreciated it. Now, it's within that perspective that I was asking my question. Yes.
And you're right that for a long time, scientists tended to be the sort of people who say, let my work speak for itself. But it's become evident that, unfortunately, the work can't speak louder than politics. So someone has to amplify the work. And that is why, if you notice, if you went 10 years back, you barely had scientists like me coming or going into studios like this.
Into a public space
like this. A public space. And now there has been an increasing appreciation. So you're right, we do need to get more louder in amplifying the work that we are doing. And that trend has picked up. And now, for example, if you are applying for a grant, all research grants will always have one section, which is community and public engagement. And it's very interesting because we have had to learn. I have done a show in Ghetto Radio. Can you imagine trying to explain infection and COVID in Sheng?
Hey,
inako infectingi tunailombotovu. So but we have had to learn because of exactly what you're saying.
Indeed. You see, if something isn't understood, its importance will also not be understood fully. Okay?
True. Very true.
Now, the commercial world, I look at the aspects of research, and I look at how it is we talk about focus group discussions.
Yes.
It's a commercial concept, really.
Yes.
That commercial enterprises would get people to try and just figure out whether this product actually... Now, research has adopted it.
Yeah.
And it has produced telling results.
Yeah.
Because people feel engaged.
Yeah.
They feel involved. And when there's an outcome, they know they're part of that outcome.
Yes.
Now, there's a question I want to ask. How does the research world get this particular aspect of our lives and its importance embedded in our educational curriculum? So that from a very, very, very early stage, you see, we're not talking coding and it's a big thing. But even that coding will require research to improve on it. How do we get this into our curriculum so that people grow up understanding the importance of this particular discipline?
Of research?
Yes, research. Yes, research. Yes.
I think part of, or rather what I see as our big challenge is the way education has been structured hitherto. And it has been predicated on you have an individual lecturer, teacher who has a lot of knowledge, and their job is to download the knowledge to the student. And the student's job is to retain as much as possible, and then when an exam is brought, to regurgitate it. And if they can do that, but you see, and in a sense, you can understand many years ago when books were not available to everybody, the resources were not available, the teacher or the lecturer, by virtue of their having been longer engaged, would have more of the educational resources. Both the physical resources, they have more access to books, but also they would have learned more. The student had no way of being cleverer than, or of having more knowledge than the lecturer. But today, my 11-year-old son can tell you everything about a rocket. Why? Because they'll just go on to Google. My job can no longer be to teach them how a rocket works. My job is to help them think. So, for example, if they're looking at some websites that are talking about rockets, how do they work out what is sensible, what is true, what is rational? So it's helping what we call develop critical thinking. And we will have to change. Our lecturers will have to change. Those yellow notes that they used to teach us from will have to change, because now knowledge has been democratized. It has been made accessible to everybody. And the only thing that we can really teach our students is critical. One is critical thinking. The second is synthesizing. You bring all this knowledge together. How does it help you develop a new thing? That is the question we should be now teaching our students. But we are still stuck, unfortunately, in our education system where it is someone dictating to you. But why are they dictating? I mean, these are things you can you can just
go and Google and
what
read.
They should be is challenging the mind. They should be saying, now that we have all these, go and put this together. How can you apply this to a problem X? How can you apply this to the energy problem we're having in Kenya? How can you apply this to the health problem we're having in Kenya? Because you already have the information. I don't need to come and download for you.
True. Yeah. Prof, you got a lot of passion, and this is evident.
Yeah.
And thank you very much for joining us and telling us what the work that you've been doing. I mean, that's the ideal program is a fantastic program.
Thank you.
And yes, they may not recognize you, but we do.
Indeed.
Thank you, and thank you for having me here.
Asante sana.
Yeah.
Professor Sam KINYANJUI is the head of training and capacity building at the KEMRI Welcome Trust program, also director of IDEAL. Say it again in full.
Initiative to develop African research leaders.
All right.